If you hadn't heard of Fantasian before seeing Fantasian Neo Dimension, I wouldn't blame you. It was a game released in 2021, but only for Apple phones, and I didn't even get to play this because I'm an Android boy. It would be a real shame if you hadn't though, because the game is helmed by Mistwalker Studios, the company created by Hironobu Sakaguchi himself, the father of Final Fantasy. With Fantasian Neo Dimension, a high-definition port of the original Fantasian, it's actually a collaboration between Mistwalker and Square Enix, making the first time that Sakaguchi has worked with Square Enix in well over 2 decades. I'd like to take a moment here to give a massive shout out to Square Enix for gifting me a copy of the game on PS5 so that I could show this game to you all for review purposes, and if you're enjoying what you're seeing here then consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Reportedly it was during a dinner with Final Fantasy XIV and 16 lead producer Naoki Yoshida in 2021 that Sakaguchi wanted to show his love for Fantasian and bring the game to other platforms, and Yoshi-P offered to have Square Enix publish the title and is now co-producer on Fantasian Neo Dimension. So if you combine that with the fact that Nobuo Uematsu, the famed composer of the Final Fantasy series, also made the music for this game, and you've got quite the dream team on your hands. One of the things that's most unique about Fantasian, and by extension Neo Dimension, is the way in which its environments are crafted. Every single backdrop you see in this game is one of over 150 handcrafted dioramas, and it's incredible the result that you get from it. And while it's strange to say, given that this is a port of what is essentially a mobile game, I, at multiple points during playing Neo Dimension, stopped and just absorbed the splendor of the environments I was in. Some of them are truly breathtaking. I will say though, the jump to 4K resolution has done the environment some interesting favors, but it also makes the disparity between the environments and the character models, the chests, and all of the things that you'd see that have come from a game engine stand out just a little bit more. As I said earlier, the music from Fantasian Neo Dimension is made by the renowned composer Nobuo Uematsu, who made the majority of the music for the early Final Fantasy games. But one thing that's interesting with Neo Dimension in particular is that it gives you a feature that allows you to swap that background music from battles, boss battles, and the Dimension battles, which we'll get into later, with music that comes from various games in the Final Fantasy franchise. And you can do this on the fly, you can randomize it, and I did find myself doing this fairly often because it was always nice just to hear something that I recognized amongst this new experience. The music isn't the only thing that reminded me of another game. The story, as a matter of fact, reminds me of older Mistwalker properties like The Last Story and Lost Odyssey. Fantasian's story surrounds a young boy called Leo who is trying to recover his lost memories whilst also trying to look into the mystery of a mysterious mechanical disease that's destroying his world. The way in which these lost memories are presented is actually very similar to how Lost Odyssey once presented them, giving you little short stories, and some of these short stories are actually pretty heart-wrenching. A lot of the themes in Fantasian's story are very evocative of early Final Fantasy games, like emotional connections or familial connections between various family members, and this isn't really surprising given that when Fantasian was in its infancy, it was inspired by Sakaguchi having played Final Fantasy VI again after decades after making it. So while I think the presentation definitely does leave some things to be desired, like I don't think the UI is the best in the world, and I do think there is a weird discrepancy between the beautiful backdrops and the lackluster character models, it's got so much uniqueness and charm to it that I still think it's an art form all its own. And more importantly, the love that went into this game is extremely apparent. So moving on to gameplay, the first thing I want to talk about is the difficulty of this game, because when Fantasian was first released, it was very much loved for those who reviewed it, but a lot of people felt that the difficulty spiked to a point where it became unapproachable for a lot of people. Well, you have the option to have that in its original form, but now Fantasian Neo Dimension has a normal and a hard difficulty, with the hard difficulty being the original and the normal one being more approachable for newer players. Fantasian's combat is presented in a very unique way. It's conditional turn-based, like you might think of Final Fantasy X, and it's very similar to that, but the way you attack is very different because the trajectories of your attacks and your skills really matter. So while an attack from a sword like Leo's will just go in a straight line and hit anything in its path, a magic attack may use curvature to try and attack enemies that are behind those that are defending them. This presents a lot of puzzle-like elements to combat, and I actually live for this. I think it's fantastic, and the boss fights really exemplify this to a massive degree. No two boss fights feel the same. There's always a gimmick or a puzzle-like element to it that you have to solve in order to win, and I love it. I played the game on normal difficulty difficulty, and even I still noticed there was a ramp up in difficulty in the second half of the game, so I could only imagine how much people struggled with it the first time round. But if I'd had more time to play it, I would have absolutely gone into it with hard difficulty. I love it when an RPG challenges me. I mentioned the Dimension earlier, and I mentioned it because it's a very interesting mechanic that I would love to see present in other JRPGs as well. While you're walking around the overworld, normally if you come across a fight, you'd stop and you'd play the fight. But in Fantasian, if you have the Dimension machine turned on, what can happen is you can store the monsters in the Dimension machine up to a certain cap, and then once you've filled that cap up, or even before, you can choose to fight all of the enemies you've stored all at once. And this harmonizes with the mechanics of combat so well because it makes it easier for you to grind out, because you could take out 7 enemies in a row as opposed to just 2. While I adore Fantasian Neo Dimension, there is one aspect of this game that really drives me up the wall, and it's to do with navigation. In any game that features pre-rendered backgrounds, we're dating back to Final Fantasy on the PS1 era, or even things like Resident Evil and Devil May Cry, whenever you would transition into another screen, sometimes the controls would go a bit screwy, and if you were holding a button down, you'd continue to run in that direction. Fantasian takes this and amplifies it really badly to the point where sometimes you'd have to stop and then start moving again, and because you transition between backgrounds quite a lot, it's really irritating to have to keep doing it. But I do really love the way in which the environments are used for navigation. For example, there might be a chest that's hidden behind a bunch of trees, and it's not until you actually walk around the trees and look that the camera will shift to a different angle of the diorama and you can actually see what you're looking for. And this was used really well in a lot of situations. A criticism that was held against Fantasian the first time it came around on Apple Arcade was the fact that it was never voice acted, because a game that's very heavy on narrative and having a focus on its story should be voice acted in this day and age as far as many people are concerned. Well, that's something that's been addressed with Neo Dimension, because now Neo Dimension is fully voice acted with both English and Japanese voiceovers. All in all, I think the word I would like to describe Fantasian Neo Dimension is the word important. I feel strongly about this game because of what it represents. With a dream team of developers, all of which are well versed in the language of JRPGs that so many of us have come to love, Fantasian was always an amazing game that just happened to be out of reach for a lot of players. With Neo Dimension though, a brand new audience can come to love a game that's rooted deeply in the aspects of JRPGs of the 90s that so many of us grew up on, but with a unique and challenging battle system, nods to its sister franchise in Final Fantasy, and a more accessible difficulty that doesn't detract from the challenge for those of us that want it, like me. Does Fantasian push the limits of this console generation to their absolute limits from a technical standpoint? No, not even slightly, but its unique diorama-based style should be celebrated for the art form that it is, and it gives proof that there is so much more than meets the eye when it comes to visual stylings. Look at this video. Just look at how much love and detail goes into one of these dioramas. I don't know if it's the traditional artist in me, but seeing the craftsmanship that goes into some of these environments just brings me so much joy. And I fear that as we move forward into an age of AI art and stuff like that, that techniques like this are just going to be left to the wayside, so we should be celebrating them while we can. So I'm extremely grateful to Square Enix for gifting me a copy of Fantasian Neo Dimension to share my thoughts with you guys, because as I'm sure you can tell, I feel quite strongly about it, and I really loved it. I will say though, given that this game is a port of a mobile title, I wasn't expecting it to be £44.99 or $49.99. I thought it might be a little bit cheaper, but I got a good 40 hours out of this, and I've still got more to do in it, so I'd say it was worth the money if quantity is what you're worried about. But what do you think? Was Fantasian Neo Dimension on your radar? Is it something you're already planning to pick up, or has some information in this review helped you to decide whether you want it or not? Let me know in the comments below, and if you're not sure what to comment, just type the word algorithm, because it is really helpful to me as a content creator for engagement purposes. So thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this content, as I said earlier, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel, or you can come and find me on all of the other social platforms like TikTok, Twitch, Discord is all linked down below if you want to find me on any of those. And if you want to support the channel further, then you could consider looking at my Etsy store where I sell handmade art prints of various different video game characters, or you can join up on my Patreon page. So thank you all very much again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.